Hello, everybody, and welcome to this fifth installment of our talks that we have been doing for the past few months. And this time our guest will be none other than Peter Sliwinski, known as Echoplex. Now, I would like to just begin that it will be the first time I think I'm conducting this with another Polish fellow in English for you, obviously to understand it. So it'll be two Poles speaking English, just for your benefit. So please excuse some of my English mistakes. Peter is much more has lived in England much more, so for a much longer time. So he'll be much more fluent, hopefully. So Echoplex, Echoplex actually has many names, as I understand it. He's a composer, producer, sound engineer, DJ, and owner of Soleil Records label. He had started many years ago, in fact 30 years, as I have understood. Peter will be more than willing to tell us all about it, in Poland. And he has developed a reputation as one electronic music's most unique artists across a variety of styles and aliases. Peter has been doing this for a very, very long time, and he has acquired a tremendous, tremendous following through the years. Finding a partner in crime and fellow techno upstart Demon Wild, Echoplex began releasing 12 inches on Wild's legendary Synewave Records labels, including under the joint side project Nightworks. And with an increasingly raised profile, the time was right in the early 2000s for Echoplex to initiate his own imprint, Soleil Records, kicking off with his own The World Energy EP. I'm skipping through some of the things, as Peter will surely be telling us more about it. He, with a discography stretching now into triple digits across labels like Soleil, Synewave, Arts, and Soma, Echoplex has toured throughout Europe, Asia, and the Americas, rocking festival crowds and headlining massive club nights with grooves that honor techno's legacy while looking to its future. Now, as a professional and certified trainer, he trains his skills and acquired knowledge to the next wave of techno artists around the world. So please welcome Peter, known as Echoplex. So, Peter, thank you very much for being here, for answering to our invitation. We are, of course, very, very happy to have you here. I have met you once before, and being a complete beginner in techno style as far as production is concerned and doing it, I'm very, very interested in what we will be talking today about. So could you maybe kick off with a little story of how you started?
So first of all, welcome everyone, and hello to you, Kris, again. Yes, indeed, we met in Gdańsk.
Yes.
And we sort of it was interesting because we haven't prepared for this, but we actually co-delivered a session together.
Yes.
Right. So it was, it was like one of those situations where two minds think alike, and creativity sparks, and then we just have to kick ourselves in the foot. Someone has to stop at some point and let the other one speak.
Yes.
But
I'll try to do my best not to interrupt you.
No. It was perfect. I really enjoyed it. So again, thank you so much for inviting me. The question was, how did I start, right?
Yeah.
I think, it all started with a love for music. As an early child and living in Poland in the Eastern Bloc, in the communist times, I was quite fortunate. My father was bringing some records home. Usually from excursions to places like Bulgaria or Romania or Yugoslavia or the former countries where they actually had vinyl. So I could get like Michael Jackson, Tina Turner, Limahl, Wham, or Stevie Wonder. So suddenly, I came across a lot of different music, but it was quite concentrated around the 80s theme, like Duran Duran, AHA, Depeche Mode, and all these things were just kind of coming into me, and I was like finding all this music without knowing the artist before, and falling in love with this warmth of a sound, of this analog, pure, kind of lush, paddy, synthy, also driving arpeggiators and strings with phasers and effects and without knowing all these technical aspects of it, I just love the sound of it. So I guess it all started with just listening to music, and then just somehow, all the things that happened after kind of led me to where I am today. I guess one of the important things was when I was drafted in a school. I remember being in I think it must have been our first or second grade of elementary school in Poland. A very serious delegation came from Warsaw with a professor looking for kids to join a Gregorian church choir. So I was actually, I wasn't singing in a choir before, but my music teacher from the elementary school has recommended me, and they have listened to me. And here I was, I was drafted among like 1,400 kids in whole Poland to join this choir that was being created in Warsaw.
Amazing.
And we started to sing in chants around Poland and also going in outside of Poland. So that was like the first kind of touch with serious music,
How old were you at that time?
I'm thinking maybe I was...
8?
This is before my mutation. I remember, my voice was still kind of changing because I was singing soprano. So it must have been, I don't know, 9, maybe something like that. So from one side, I get music that's electronic without really knowing it's electronic. Just, it's warm and beautiful sounding and melodic. And on the other hand, I have this dark, really deep, really kind of nostalgic themes of Gregorian chants, that I'm singing in German, in Polish, in English. So I think those two things have like really collided in my creativity, and I could see a lot of resemblances to the music that I'm making from those two really serious kind of influences, of like early influences of just sounds and music. In the same time, I was also accepted to a music school in Warsaw for being a drummer. However, I have skipped this school because I found it very boring. For one particular reason, as a drummer, I imagined getting sticks, going home and playing drums. But that didn't happen. For 6 months. I was learning theory of how to play drums.
Oh my God.
So I remember having no drum, but having a sofa and the sticks, and I would be, I'll be hitting the sticks to get the rhythm right. So I was like, no, this is not for me. So I skipped early music school.
All right. So what was next?
Well, I guess the next thing was the journey to North America, but through Europe. So my family has immigrated through Italy, and we found ourselves in a city outside of, because that was one of the requirements that you needed to go through a Western country in order to immigrate to place like, as a refugee, for example, immigrate to place like New Zealand or Australia or America or Canada in our case. So we were in Italy for 2 years, and I think this is where I actually came across techno. Because we're talking about techno music. I mean, I make all kinds of music, but my specialty as Echoplex is techno. And I think those the 1988, 1989 times in Italy were kind of shaping my mind to like dance music, like as a beat music, not just like songs that have like new age or romanticism in it, but more driving club music, where I have come across a lot of radio shows, and I was listening to a lot of radios. So I suddenly switched my kind of, let's say, my taste, gone from maybe a bit more pop music, because we can consider Duran Duran or a-ha very pop music, to very underground music, like early rave music that was being created in the end of the 80s.
So what time did you actually start playing around with this on your own?
So I've started making music a bit later. First, I started DJing, and that was my first touch, was like being behind the turntables first cassette decks actually, but then turntables, and then just being curious about how is this music created has led me to find out that those sounds on the record are not just imaginary wild machines made on the computer, but they're called a synthesizer, and it's a Prophet, and it's a Moog, and it's an ARP, and it's a Yamaha. So I've started to discover through books as well, because I landed in Canada, and I started to go to a local library in Windsor next to Detroit, and getting all these books on vintage synthesizers. And I was like going to a pawn shop after and looking for them, because it was that time where you could actually go and find. So I remember this is how I came across this, I'm going to unplug it. So I didn't know what this was. I looked it online. That's a TB303, right?
Yeah.
So I looked it online. What am I saying? Looked it online. Looked it in the books.
In the books, yes.
We're so used to living online that I forgot that there was bookshops and like libraries. No, I looked in a library for vintage synthesizer. I came across this box. I went to a guitar shop, and I've showed the picture on the box of this box. Do you have this by any chance? And the gentleman is like, oh, you mean that thing that nobody liked because it was supposed to imitate the bass guitar? Yeah, we have one lying around here somewhere. How much would you like pay for it? I was like, I don't know. What is it worth to you? $75, okay to you?
Okay, so you got it.
So that's how I really got into synthesizers. Reading about the music, how it's being made, and then what machines are used, and then finding the kind of machines that would suit me in terms of the sound that I was really wanting to create. So the TB303 was in particular important to me because at that time I had not really much access to bass or to to play bass guitar or anything like that. I wasn't able to do that back then. I can do a little bit now, but back then I found out that this could imitate the bass line, so it freed my hands. There's my bass player being played on one left-hand side, and I can play a drum machine on my right-hand side. So that's how I started to figure out that by combining a couple machines, I can become like a one-man kind of techno band thing. Of course, many people were doing it already, but there was no internet, there was no YouTube. You couldn't just Google anything. It was all here, it was all in your mind and whatever you could find all around you. And I have to say that the people were not really willing to share. When I lived in Windsor next to Detroit, it was really hard to find out. If you just come up to somebody, ask them, hey, how is this made? Or how is this music being created? You wouldn't get an answer unless you were in a circle very close to these people. So it was like, it was quite tough to get this knowledge. But I guess if you wanted it, it was available somehow in a library,
I guess it was, it's much different now because I see this stuff everywhere, and you yourself, you share your knowledge quite easily. So, but we'll get to that perhaps at the end. Shall we go over to some other part of your life that you
find? We
can
probably skip a part because I think what was important that actually got me into making, I would say, somehow professional music, to some extent, was when I went to high school. And I went to a high school, and I had no idea this had ever existed in this high school. I just landed in this high school, and Port Moody High School. And when I was choosing courses, because this is the beauty of Canadian education, you could actually choose a course that you want to take. So I didn't like, physics or math or things, although these are related to sound engineering. So respect to those people who are really good at this, you included. However, I've chosen photography. And then down the line, I needed 13 courses. I'm like, what am I going to do in this school? 13 courses, and look what I found. It says eco. I'm like, eco? What is eco? What is eco? I went to school and I asked before I joined I ticked my box. Oh, this is electronic music composition course.
Hey, amazing.
Like, what? Electronic music composition? What do you mean? Oh, we can take you to a studio. I'm like, you have a studio in this high school? Like, yeah, we do. So it was like an absolute, crazy thing.
Excellent.
So I went to a school studio, and there was one of the first Macs with C-Lab, Notator, Cubase, the early, really Atari speech programs as well, for like making speech that were then used on famous records like Kraftwerk and things like that. But there was a synthesizer, an actual synthesizer, Roland JX8P with a PG800 programmer. But not only that, the studio was fully equipped with an 8-track ADAT recorder, Korg delay, sampling delay, Space Echo, and a Korg PS3100 modular polyphonic synthesizer that I have acquired. I'm not going to move my camera around, but those who follow me on YouTube, they'll know the story anyways. But at that school, I was given that synthesizer basically. So that was like, this is where I actually start. I think something just went like that.
Okay.
I figured out I have a place. I can go there anytime because I've been given a key from the school teacher. So my weekends were, well spent. Instead of going partying and dancing and drinking and whatever else you'd be doing at the early age of experimentation, I was experimenting with sounds. And that's how I've learned all this stuff. Because it was not enough time. I went to this electronic music composition course, and I went to a principal because I finished it. And I went to the principal. It's like, can I repeat this course? Like, you can't repeat the course. You already have a credit. Like, what if I just want to improve on it and I can write a letter to the school? And they put me a second year on it. So I done it twice to have an access to this professional studio.
Great. So you had a proper analog mixing desk and everything.
It was like the early days, like it wasn't. It was small desks, but still it was like an actual channels with sends and returns and even compressors.
What did you record to? What did you record to? ADAT?
You were record to ADAT. Yes,
okay.
Exactly. It was the ADAT with the VHS tape. Like really old school, but it worked because you could. I remember recording one track of a synthesizer, just playing on it, and then dubbing with another synthesizer and another synthesizer. And I mean, this is how my early ambient music was created in that studio, because I could layer certain elements together. I didn't have to time them. It was more spontaneous. It was kind of like the way modular techno is being created now, without the syncing and without the the needs to really be in time with everything. It was just more kind of feeling the emotions and layering the channels. So that's how I've learned this idea of mixing music together, just by using faders and just bringing elements together one by one.
Was that mainly question of experimenting by yourself, or did you have a mentor along this time?
So I mean, my mentor was the teacher that run the course, because he was the one that was giving me some special privileges. I could stay after school. I got the key to the school from the janitor. I got the core given as a gift. Those are really, really serious privileges that I got. Not everybody got this privilege, but I think not everyone was as crazy about music as I was. And given not just the passion on paper and passing the course, but really putting the time and devotion into the education behind it, and staying those extra hours and showing that I can actually progress and I can move forward with music making. So he was my mentor in a way, not officially, but in a way I kind of felt like he was giving me the steps. Yeah.
So that's about when you were 15 to 18. Am I right?
Yeah, this is before my driver's license.
So what happened next after the high school?
So after high school, there was this. Around the high school time, we started already this, but then it kind of exploded further. It was a desire to. I guess it derived from that performing with Gregorian church choirs. I wanted to perform live. I wanted bring my music into an audience. So it was it was all around getting the right setup for my live performance, being able to sync everything, coming across things like samplers, and being able to take a lot more sounds in a more compact way with you, and then just going to clubs. I was quite motivated to become a resident of a club, so I would walk into a club and say, I would like to be a resident of this club. They usually looked at me like, what are you talking about? We have a residence. Like, let me talk to him. So that's how I usually got my first foot in the door, being confident about it and just showing my passion and saying, look, I'll open for you. Not a problem. I'll be, obviously you had to play for free at the beginning and things like that. But we all did it, You had to plug the cables first, and then now you have people helping you in your recording sessions. So you understand that you had to make those steps. But it was the motivation to be on stage and to get into the scene, So I started to go out to some events, to some raves and concerts and parties and club nights, meeting people, and eventually getting into radio performances, like radio station performances, as well as my first live performances in clubs and raves, yeah.
Which was at the age of what, 19, 18?
So we're talking about my first were like 93, 94. So,
Okay.
This is after my high school in a way, but still at the quite early age.
Okay.
Yeah.
So where did you move afterwards? Because you ended up in Poland, back in Poland, right? At some time.
Yeah, well, first from Windsor, I ended up in Vancouver, British Columbia.
Okay.
This is where I went to high school.
Okay, and then?
And then from there, I moved back to Poland. But this was many years after, where techno was already quite popular in Poland at that time. There were some like club nights, and there was a magazines talking about music and things. So I guess I was quite lucky as well. I had a lot of luck, to be honest. You gotta have some luck. You know it yourself. You've done the route.
You do. You help it, though. You help
my luck
it.
was that I was from Canada, a Canadian artist living in Poland or staying in Poland or visiting Poland was like an alien coming from space, and in those times, because it wasn't like now where you have clubs and you have DJs coming from Berlin or going from all over Europe or even the world, Back in those days, it was more about the local SMO scene. It was about local DJs. So anybody that you could put on a poster with a Canada next to their name was like a special price, or you could call a higher price of a ticket, or you could get more people to come to the event because they're thinking, oh, he's from Canada, he must be good, So that's how it worked, really. So that got me into a lot of events in Poland, playing like sometimes 3 times per week, in various places. Obviously, the moment they start to figure out that I'm not Canadian in 100% and I have Polish roots, then they go like, he's ours, he's local. So that treatment was kind of gone in a way. But for some time I had some privilege as well. Shall we put it this way?
And so that's about 2000, is it?
This is around 1999.
Okay.
It all started with 97, I believe, my first kind of gig. 98, 97, my first gigs in Poland. And then, But I permanently moved around the end of the 90s. Yeah.
Okay.
Moved back.
So 2000s is the Polish episode.
2000 was like, I guess it was a time where I have gone from being a DJ and a live performer into thinking of doing records, doing releases on vinyl, and eventually, starting my own record label in 2000. I believe it was 2002, 2003, or something like that. So that came quite natural because I've released a lot of music on different labels, and I was thinking, if you really think about it, for those people who really want to start a label, I have some recommendation is to release their music first and then seek another label if they need it at the end. because over all those years, if you just think about it, if I put all those, say, 100 records into my own label, that label would have been quite significant right now in terms of discography, in terms of reputation, in terms of recognition. Instead, I have recorded all over the place in different small, bigger labels and spread across a lot of labels. So I lost the focus, I think. It's my recommendation, my advice to people that are thinking about, they are doing music and they're thinking about starting a label. If you can, do it your own, and then maybe choose maybe 2 top labels that you can reach, for example, to work with. But I wouldn't recommend releasing as many records on different labels as I did. So.
Okay, so that
lessons learned, right? I'm trying to pass you some wisdom, I suppose. Something that you can use.
It's the kind of thing you don't get in books often.
No, and they don't teach you in the school as well, because I guess the notion is, okay, just try to release as much as music. But that's not really true, because if you look at very successful DJs and producers around the world, some of them have not a lot of records out. But they have records in the right places, in the right time. Sometimes you need, one good record can do a lot of really good things for you, and you can release 50 records and nothing happens.
That's true. Somehow luck is part of it, but I also feel it's the aura of everybody and the energy you put in that helps it or not. Some people are they seem destined for glory, and some do not. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, depending what's your glory,
Yeah, exactly. Like a glory, not in the sense of being right at the top, but just having at least a good career, a run, being able to pay your bills and buy APS speakers from time to time, which incidentally brings us to 2005 and 6. We've been talking about this.
Oh, I think it brings us to around 2000. Yeah, the end of 2005. Well, I can't remember exactly the year, because I wasn't counting the years, but it must have been around 2006. Yes.
Yes, it's a very interesting year for me, because we just co-founded APS. I met the guys, I think, in 2003 or 4, while trying to fix a tonsil speaker, basically. I went there, met them, and I founded a company in France, Audio Planet, to help originally distribute the TLC Pro, which was the mark that the brand that they had in tonsil. And once tonsil folded, well, there was an opening for maybe a new idea, and that's how APS started. And you basically got to use the very first one of the very first models.
Chris, I think it must have been number 3 of your actual production speaker.
It's amazing.
When I was in Poland at that time, I was I was active on the scene, and I found out about this a shop that has speakers in Warsaw. Polish speakers, Polish-made speakers, anyways. And they offered me to buy those speakers because they were a beta version. They were like, they were not officially be able to be sold to anybody, but they could sell it to me because, I've produced music, etc. So I said, okay, fine. You could just I'll test them, because I was using my techniques. They were very loyal to me for many years. I brought them from Canada, by the way. They were techniques, hi-fi stereo speakers, the really tall speakers. But they had something that I've actually discovered in the APS later, but I'll tell you. They had this direct signal from the actual speaker without any enhancement. So however bad your mixes were, that speaker was able to, produce that sort of sound, obviously not as good quality as the professional speakers like APS. However, when I brought those speakers into the studio and I played my music, I kind of got depressed, because I was thinking, it's either those speakers sound bad or my production needs a lot of work. So it actually turns out to be the latter. It took me some time to fall in love with these speakers. But once I did, here you are in the back. APS is still with me since the 2005. So it's kind of like my son was born in 2005. So when you think about it, 15 years, you know.
So yeah, it's basically if I remember how old is your son, I'll remember how old is the company, which I have harder time to actually to do so because it's just years blend into.
That's exactly how I reminded myself. My first son Miko was born in 2005, and around the time the speakers were born in my kind of life or my environment, shall we say?
So
yeah.
So you said that there was this question of either the speakers being bad or your production needing some work, and it was the latter. So what it means really that the speaker is the very tool that's the mirror of what you're doing.
Yeah.
And how did that improve your production, and how does it continue to do so now?
Well, at that time, actually, we were. I remember we had like a band project in Poland. So besides doing the techno music, I was also having a band, and it was a small, like a duo project with one guy who's quite recognizable now in Poland. It's called Bash. He's a producer, and he releases records and performs live. We had this project called the Soundlight, and those APS speakers were. I remember we had like a string quartet, for example, an actual string quartet. You know, like the 4 musicians coming into the studio with some microphones, with a mixing board, and we're using those speakers. And I was actually being able to listen after when we recorded those instruments. When I listened to those instruments live, I kind of felt like those musicians are still playing in the back of my head. You know, it was so natural sounding. So, I mean, those speakers have improved my ability to judge not the quality of the music, but the balance and all the things that are very much related to sound production. I'm able to naturally distinguish between something that's ready to be released or something that needs a lot of work. But it's a very painful process, as I said, because I had any friends coming to a studio and their mixes were sounding very, very flat, and they're like, how come my speakers, I have the Rocket, or I have another brands without dropping any names here, and it sounds so beautiful and fat. I'm like, yeah, but when you take it to a club, does it sound beautiful and full? No. It's like, well, there you go. Yeah. So that's the answer. You maybe at first kind of, it's almost like Photoshop in a way, those speakers. I kind of feel like they mask all those inconsistencies and all those problems that you've got in your mixes. Whereas
that's exactly what you need to hear.
Really, really kind of, there's no hiding, that it is what it is. That's what you get. And that's what I love about these monitors is the actual, there's no lie,
I see a big change though, because you were talking about APS Ian, obviously the first model that we've ever released. But while I see in your studio the latest Ian 2 and its extender. I've got it in white behind me, and you've got it in black. So would you like to tell us?
These speakers are I'm not able to even use like 25% of the power of these speakers in my studio because it's such a huge sound, But it's also good because it taught me how to produce music in a low volume, which is really good for your ears. Being very close to the speakers at a very low volume, I'm able to judge more the mixed balance of the elements, like the bass versus the mid and the high frequencies. So yes, I mean, I was very lucky to be able to get these speakers from you guys. So here they are, as you can see them. I've been using them since, but I've also been using them in the workshops because they sound fantastic in larger spaces. So I remember going to an Ayrshire college, which is a local college here in Scotland, and we were playing. It almost sounded like we're in a club, They were so loud. It's like, I just wish I had more room in my studio. I could probably enjoy louder music. But I
think part of the reason is that this is child of a cooperation between APS and Germano Studios, Tony Germano and his team. So we know that Americans love to work loud. Actually, that's one of a big.
Yeah.
It's a big difference between Europe really and the US, and they needed something that could stand the rigors of that kind of work approach, and hence the power that you get, and a very solid reserve that you can count on.
Yeah, I think it's the kind of speaker that you could use. I really love DJing on these speakers as well. As you see, I have turntables here, and they're really good for monitoring because they give you, especially with those bass extenders, you know, when you're mixing, you're looking for that beat, you're looking for that very low frequency, but it's not muddy, it's not like really enhanced, and it's painful to your ear. It's really nice and warm, and it's really easy to actually beat mix in these speakers. So I've been using these speakers both as DJing and production, so both instances.
I see you're pretty hybrid. I see a mixing desk, a very nice Venice, and there is Apollo, UAD Apollo that I also have in my studio, and some nice Neve Pre. So you're a man of both worlds. How do you find that? Do you think combining the two is the way to go, or those who don't have the money to start with some analog gear could, you know, possibly use something like we used an Apollo, emulations of pre's and things like that? How do you know, the sound?
I mean, you know it yourself. When you have access to Apollo, you know, you have the UAD plugins, which sounds absolutely amazing. You know, like the EQs and like all the kind of the simulations of all the classic boxes, like the Teletronics, compressors, and things like that. They're incredible. But I guess the reason why I like the hybrid setup, it's because I'm used to the actual faders, you know, like I like you know, it's something interesting. I've been thinking about this lately, but I kind of felt when I was using because I used to just use the computer on its own. There were instances where I was traveling, you know, like you take a laptop, headphones, or you're in the studio, someone else's studio with speakers. But I kind of felt like I'm mixing with my eyes instead of mixing with my ears. You know, because you are watching the screen, you're scrolling the mouse, you're moving across the different elements. However, when you are in front of a desk and you've got the speakers, you are listening to what's coming through, and you can instantly make those changes with your hands. And I guess that's one of the reasons why I really like the hybrid setup. It allows me to have some. I have some really cool plugins and VSTs. But I like to have even like a digital 80s kind of reverberation by Korg, a hardware unit that just adds a different color to the production, and that's going into the sends and returns onto the desk.
So you're mixing, you're mixing and summing through the desk. Is that what you do?
So I have this. I have a patch bay here, but the way it's set up is I have a 16 ins and outs. So there is a time where I'm taking the signal from the computer onto the desk. If I need to add more color, if I need to have that, you know, if I find the mix in Ableton Live, for example, is a bit too flat, then running it through a mixer and adding that punchy EQ from this console allows me to get a bit more analog sound into it. But I also use the desk to jam around all the different instruments and record it live into the computer and then editing onto the computer. So it's like kind of going back and forth, if you know what I mean. Like going into the computer via the desk and going out of the computer back to the desk.
Right. So you've got all the synths connected to Venice, or do they go straight to the sound card?
No, they're actually connected to the patch bay.
Okay.
So and the patch bay, it's all linked up to the mixer. So I basically, by a switch, I can decide whether I have a signal that's incoming or a signal that's outcoming. Yeah. So by that means I could run all the synths and drums that I've got here onto the desk, more than 16 channels, but my sound card, I only have 16 cables, so basically. But 16 channels, I find it actually quite useful because it limits, and it's good because I can't imagine having a good electronic techno track, for example, with 32 channels. You don't really need to. You can concentrate on 16 channels and get a really good sound of each of those elements, getting the right balance instead of layering more and more sounds on top of it.
That's actually it's a very interesting thing you've just put your finger on. I often find in production and working with people who do their own music, not necessarily in techno because I work in acoustic music, but it's just the same. It's by not taking enough care of the first few layers, they feel that will keep on adding. By keep on adding, they will just get it better. Where obviously that's not the case, and I see that in techno when you were doing this workshop in Gdańsk. You were very mindful of that, and you were explaining to the people who were present how you take care of every element, making sure that it actually is what you want to end up in the arrangement before carrying on with the next element. Is that the approach?
It's actually, I can even go further. It's exactly that. Plus, that actually serves the purpose of eliminating more elements in your music rather than adding and layering more elements to your music. You see, because we're coming across this concept of minimalism and minimal music, for example. It's been going on for years. Minimal techno, and also, even the styles of music like hip hop and things like that. Now, the trap, they're all very minimal. Yeah. But they're not minimal in terms of what you put into that work. They're minimal because you end up maybe with 16 channels or 8 channels. You think it's minimal, but it's really the effort that you make to make those sounds sound full in a spectrum, in the frequency spectrum. Because you have to think about it. I always like to relate to this. I don't have it with me, but like a bottle, that bottle of water can only fit that much water. You cannot put more water into that bottle. So you have to open the cap and throw some water out in order to put juice or sugar or salt or whatever you want to put into that bottle. So, or rocks or whatever you think about it when you think about your production, So I like to use this analogy of a bottle. And my bottle usually is, it's not full. It leaves a bit of room to then decide if I need to layer another sound. And maybe that's why it sounds fuller, but not overwhelming. And it's still you can still kind of digest it, and you can focus and you can concentrate on the elements and enjoy the music,
Yeah, I think it sounds like it's very much the same as it is in the acoustic production, really, that by taking great care of what your arrangement is and how you record, obviously, because when you have less instruments, you can think of them differently. Because if you have a very dense arrangement, then perhaps every instrument will have to sound actually differently, will have their spectrum reduced, for example. That's why you end up with a very clanky piano in a very dense environment, because it just doesn't have the space. It needs to leave space for the bass and whatever is happening around it.
But in like acoustic music, for example, what you just said, say you got a snare sound.
Yeah.
It's a very similar thing in techno music, for example. You have a snare sound, and you have one snare sound, and then you have a clap, and then you have a ride, and then you have a crash, and then you have another type of clap, and then you have another type of snare. It's not really that's how it works, like when you think about a band, because I always like to relate to the band concept. Do you have a drummer that plays an African bongo with a standard Yamaha kit and an electronic drum kit all together? Or do you have one snare from that Yamaha, for example, maybe recorded with few different microphones to give you that control over each of the elements that you're putting into that production, and you making sure that one single sound is full, but not by multiplication of different instruments with different ranges of scales and notes and things. No, by the frequency, So one microphone is taking the bottom, one microphone is taking the higher, capturing the higher sound of the snare. And that's the same idea that I like to apply in techno music, by tripling kick drums and tripling snare drums, and suddenly you may end up with maybe 8 elements, but the production that goes through, it's like I remember I made a record. I think a lot of people recognize it was a quite recognizable record I did for a Synewave label. Was called Classified as Unclassified Record. That was the name of the EP. And I remember I used one sampler, one drum machine, and what I did is I basically took a sound that was the source sound, a synth, and then I layered it with a sampled version of it. So one was a very raw, non-filtered, nothing happens to it bass kind of foundation, and the other live version was actually tweaked, and a lot of effects went through it. So again, very minimal approach, but giving you a quite full sound.
It reminds me that in Michael Jackson times that you've listened to, as you've said.
Oh yeah.
They would actually run the synths through studio speakers, and they would re-record them in stereo with stereo mics to get a different texture, which is basically what you did, basically combining the original with some kind of a re-recorded version of it. So. Definitely nowadays with drums, the acoustic drums, we often, at least what I've seen that done, and I do that too, is we actually sample our own drums at the end of the session, so to have a better control over the attacks, for example, during certain parts of the song, if we need them a little bit more solid. And also we layer them with triggers and things like that. So there's a lot of things that are in common between the two styles, even though they sound different.
Yeah, because once you get the dynamics, once you get the attack, once you get all the control velocity of it, you can replace that sound with anything as well. So you can have a well-produced snare drum coming from a different session into your drummer production. So, for example, that's what I do in Pro Tools, and that's why I'm sure you do that anyways, but I'm just saying for those people who are maybe watching us, this is also an interesting way of getting a fuller sound,
I see there's a little bit of movement on our channel, not much, but I would just like to take this time to ask you guys watching us that if you have any questions while we do that, just please write them out, and we'll try to get Peter to respond as much as we can. Sure. I think Paver Seraphin is saying I can only... yes, limitations always spark up the creativity in the mix, which is what we were talking about. Yes,
exactly.
And weirdly enough, having done a number of movies, scored a number of movies myself, it's also true in a very large score, symphonic score, where you have to keep that in mind. And people like Mozart and all those who followed, including the big stars of the movie scene, they know that you can't just put everything. Not everybody can play a different note, because it would end up being a cacophony. So, minimalism is present everywhere, really, just in different, varying degrees.
See, when I think about techno music and how it relates to, for example, pop music or acoustic music, as you were saying, I think about the synthesizer, the sound of a synthesizer being the singer in your production, so that's your lead kind of sound. And you have your drummer, you have your drum machine, you have your bass, you have your bass line, you have the TB303, or you have Behringer or whatever they're making now, and you have many choices, etc., etc. So it's all very much related, and it goes back into, it's not about how many elements you're using into the music or in your production, is what are those elements and how they relate to each other, and what kind of quality of those elements you put in. Because let's be serious, I can get a really interesting result by taking a signal out into even a guitar speaker and then routing back into my computer. That's going to give me a different color. It's almost like I'm allowing my palette of colors as a painter, for example, mixing in with some blending in with on the other elements together. So we're going back into this hybrid setup. It took me years to really jump away into computer, because that was really hardware. I guess I realized that you could do much more with a computer in a quicker way, and also control many things at once with a computer. But I come from that mindset, and it's all about the thinking, and it's all about the mindset here. That comes from that high school, having cables, a microphone, anything laying around and making a use of it. And it doesn't really matter how much money you spend into the studio. I much prefer, to be honest, to having a really good sound card and really good speakers than having a lot of gear, like a lot of synthesizers, because sometimes you just need one really good synthesizer to make it work. And it's a good example how, like, for example, the first Depeche Mode records that Daniel Miller was producing were made on a mini Korg synthesizer, a monophonic synthesizer. If you give anybody a single synthesizer right now, they go like, what should I do with this? I can't make music with this. I need this DAW. I need this controller. I need push. I need a synth, a drum machine, a way to synchronize. No, you don't. You have your hands, and you have one synth. You have ADAT with a VHS tape, and you can layer sounds together. Right?
And you have your imagination. Yeah, it's a state of mind, really.
It's an imagination. So I always do this in when I'm talking to people, or when I'm doing the lectures and workshops and things. I say, look, buy gear that's going to limit you, and learn it, because you'd be quite amazed how much you can get out of it. I have I kind of feel sorry for people that buy gear all the time without learning what they actually have in the arsenal. How many times do you see people buying a synthesizer because someone said it, or they heard it on YouTube that it's good, and then they put it into their setup. It doesn't work. It doesn't fit. It doesn't synchronize in the way they want.
And it just stays there.
And then they go on a sale to buy something else, versus keep it, learn it, and then realize, okay, do I need anything else, or can I make it work? When I was going to this high school in Canada, I started looking for gear, but it's not like I was going and buying everything there was. No, I bought a drum machine, a Roland drum machine, right? Another silver box, TR-606. Why did I buy this? Well, for one reason. It has batteries, right? So what could I do? I could take it to school, and I used to. I'll take it to school during lunch hour. Kids were eating lunch. What I was doing, I put my headphones on and I was making beats. With one single drum machine, you could do a lot.
It's true. We're getting a bit of love about the speakers from our viewers, and also Pavel.
Yes.
And Pavel Serafin is saying that's why I'll never get rid of my good old trusty Yamaha SU200 sampler.
Well, it's a workstation, not just a sampler. I know it. I've used it before. It's like one of those boxes that you can do. It's like a groove box in a way. You can do a lot with, and it's good for live performance as well. And I totally agree that it's a good thinking. It's not like suddenly you need a very expensive sampler for like £1,000 or €1,000. You can have that for maybe 200 or 150 if you're lucky to find it now, and buy something else instead. So it's really about knowing your gear. So I do agree with this comment. Yeah.
We have a question concerning APS.
Right.
Marcini Samurabe is asking, hey and welcome. My question is, your studio not too small for sub-extenders? So I guess he's talking about your studios.
Exactly my point before. Yeah, so he has read this. Well, the good thing is that my station to work it's in the middle of my room, so they are quite big speakers indeed. However, I try to keep them as far as I can to have the ability to hear them well. But don't get me wrong. Sometimes what happens is I remove the desk. Right now it's here just because of the process that I'm in making music. I need the desk, but there are times where the desk goes on the side, and I'm able to move the speakers in a different position as well. So I do a lot of, and this is also this is an interesting conversation that we could have. It's not just the gear that you have, but how it's set up. That gives you a different result. But they are very large speakers, and I would recommend maybe a couple more square meters in your studios.
Or maybe just starting with just the EN2 and figuring out if you have enough bass, because part of the reason we did the extenders is really to give the EN2 a bit of breathing space by taking on part of the spectrum. So the EN2 actually does go pretty low. But what happens when you add the extender is that you make the EN2 work less. That's the idea. So maybe in your case, even a classic 2020 will be enough, or yes, EN2.
I mean, that's, it's a very good point. That's the reason why I have used those previous APS speakers for so many years, because they were good for a smaller size, but they were also good for a large room. The thing is, I just love the low bass on these speakers is so amazing. It gives me it's almost like a air conditioning system in your studio, if you know what I mean. It gives you this breath of fresh air sometimes, especially at the low frequencies. But another thing is that's very important is I actually could not hear some of the sub frequencies on other speakers, but I can now. So it's no longer about seeing those frequencies on the screen when you are using a spectrum analyzer, but you actually feel it in your stomach. You're like, that's a bit too much. You need to turn this down. So.
Speaking about much larger spaces, my studio is about 44 meters, so it's pretty nice. It's rather large and long, but I'll be producing a live recording in Abbey Road Studio 3 in a couple of weeks, and it's a pretty big room, a control room, and I'm getting an EN2 and an extender in there. So hopefully I'll have some feedback on that too, how they respond in really big control rooms. But I think they'll do fine. I think what's the strength of EN2 also and ENs that they and classics, they behave well more or less independently of the size of the room. But it's up to us, the user, to correctly install them, of course, because if you have a room that has a lot of modes and cancellations throughout the space, then you do have to think about it twice and think about your acoustics and how you place them. And you mentioned about playing them not too loud, apparently, when you work, Peter.
Yes. I've noticed that when I had smaller speakers, I would crank them up more. And this is it's potentially dangerous and fatigue, because if you think about it, if you're working with music a long hours, and a lot of us, we work during the day and then we work on music during the night when we're very tired and things like that, unless it's weekends. But still, you're spending a lot of hours in front of a sound. So what these speakers actually taught me is that you could get a beautiful sound but very low level, and get a lot more focus on what's really happening in your mix. I mean, to be honest, I'm mixing very low now. I'm only DJing very loud just because it's fun. But when I'm mixing the music and producing it, it's I learn how to take the joy of clubbing in the studio, if you know what I mean, but to focus on the actual professional sound aspect of it by listening to the music very low, being able to do it longer hours, and really hearing what's happening in the mix. So yeah, larger speakers can also give you that kind of feeling like, I maybe need to turn these down. Yeah. And your ears love it. Yeah.
And it's also part of the kind of idea behind. I remember talking to Gregorian, who's one of our co-founding members and of APS, and he's the guy behind the design, and why we chose the paper cones, which are not covered. So the idea is that the paper cones that are not covered are more detailed. So you don't have to push the speakers as loud, whereas the covered cones are more linear, so they're less difficult to actually to design the electronics for, but they lose some of that detail thanks to that coating. So that was actually one of the reasons why we chose that style of cone, and it stayed with us until now, basically.
I think you already mentioned this in our workshops, is that part of your budget when you think about monitoring in your studio should be speakers as well as your soundproofing,
acoustics, yeah, acoustics,
some acoustics in your room. So I think, going back into the question or comment about if the speakers are too big, I have actually isolated this room really well. So there's not so much leak of a sound. There's not so much bouncing of sub-bass frequencies going in the room. So it's actually works okay even in a smaller space because of that. And exactly where I'm sitting, I have a hot spot, and you know what that is. This is where the sub-bass sounds the best. So actually, it gives me a good reference to what how much sub there is in the mix.
So, do you find that you have to go back to the mixes often, or are you so accustomed to the speakers and your, shall we say, knowledge and your expertise in mixing by now is such that you basically mix and then that it's done?
Well, I do like when it comes to mixing, right? There are at least like 3 stages during a production of a track, shall we say, that I'm mixing something. Okay, I do it at the very early stages when I'm just getting a good balance, EQing, and a good relation off to the sound before layering any too many effects and reverbs and whatnot. And then when I'm mixing live the track into an arrangement, and when I'm mixing it down into DAT or whatever I'm going to be recording to. So by the time I get to the 3rd stage of mixing, shall we say, right? I'm really good in what's happening in the mix, so there's not much work that needs to be done.
Okay.
It's all about trusting the speakers that you're using. I realized one thing. If you got speakers that are allowing you to have a certain sound in your studio and then take it somewhere else, and it doesn't really change that much, in terms of environments. For example, sounds pretty similar in a car, sounds similar in a club. Those are the best speakers you can get because they give you less work. Because once you don't need to go over it and mangle it and destroy your mixes and destroy your tracks by all means as well. Because you trust, okay, if a little bit of mastering on top, it's gonna sound good. So I've really learned these speakers for all over the years, and now I don't. Once it's mixed down the 3rd stage, and I don't touch it anymore. It's done. And usually I get pretty good feedback from mastering engineers, or if I master music myself, in some cases. They go like, "Oh, you didn't give me much work to do. I just needed to put this 0 and because it was -6 before, and that's it."
Everybody wants to hear that.
That's pretty good.
Yes. Yes. So we've kind of run out of time. We've hit 1 hour. Yeah. I think it's a good time for us to stop. But I would like to perhaps ask you.
Yes.
You're a great. I've seen you at work, and you really are a great teacher. Could you leave us and the viewers with one final thought that you can take your time to think about it? One final thought on maybe not the most important, but a very important part of the process that you would like to leave us with, like something that will help people start the thought process on how to do these things. Something important.
I think the biggest, the most important thing in making music is having a kind of clear judgment on your own production. What do I mean by this? How do you say this? Well, not only kind of relating to what other people think of your music and how it sounds and how is it produced, but also getting to the point and just accepting the fact, like, this is the best I could have done with this mix at this point, based on my ability, based on my experience, based on the gear I have, and not beat yourself over that process, but rather finish it and then move on to something else. Because by the time you get to like maybe another production, you know it yourself, you know, your previous productions were of course, they were miles away from where you are now, but you wouldn't get to where you are now if you haven't completed those productions. So I guess that's all I could say to people is just to accept that the best you could do at this moment, this is it. You've given your effort, you put in your time, and it's time to move on. You need to close that session. You cannot open another master of a master of a master of a final mix, 2001, 2010,
No.
a real final mix. No, you need to close it. You need to let it go and move on to the next thing.
Yeah, the moment you end up with names like final, 10.2 BAC, it's not good.
And you know, it's our best and worst friend called the DAW.
Yeah, it's true.
We can always say, Kris, by the way, sorry, I need to pick up a phone. I'm going to go out to shopping, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to make another version. So, you know, it is the comfort of working because we can, you know, we can move back and forth with the session. But
to a point, up to a point.
That, I guess another thing I could say about this, what I actually do is that I maybe get to the point. You remember where I was talking about the bottle earlier? Like it's not full.
Yeah.
This is very relevant because what I do in my mix downs or in my production is I get to a level of like 70 or 80%. Perfectionism, shall we say. And then I say, if I make another step, it's a feeling, you know, if I make another step, I'm going to destroy this mix.
Okay.
And it's knowing, it's almost like a casino,
right?
You know, you go into a casino, you've got this, you know, amount of money in front of you, and you're like, I'm going to play one more time because I can win more. And then you can lose it all. You know,
I agree.
That's how I like to think about it. You know, like you need to know when exactly to say,
stop.
That's it. Stop. And usually that limitations, you know, we're talking about 16 channels, for example, in my studio. I was thinking, I'm going to get another Polo. I'm going to do 32 channel because I have a 32 channel. That's like, no. Stop. 16 channels, and that's all you get, my friend.
It's.
If you can't mix in, listen, if you can't mix in 16 channels, you might as well not mix at all.
That's true.
Because you can take subgroups, right? You can take basses.
Yeah.
You know, if you really need a lot more, you can do 16 subgroups.
You could.
I mean, that would be like almost like a film production, but still you could do that.
Yeah. You could. And actually we do. We do subgroups on bigger projects when you have a whole orchestra. Obviously, it's divided into subgroups. But yeah, subgroups are good, and mixing on them is fun too. So.
Exactly.
So thank you very much.
I don't know if that answers to your desire, but
yes.
That's all I could say.
I feel fulfilled.
Everything else is not relevant if you can't finish music.
Exactly. I think it's important to know when to close the book. And go on to the next one.
Well, that's another thing. How many edits can you make with a typewriter now?
Yeah.
How many edits can you make with a computer now? Right? So we have gone over to, I'm going to save this as a draft. Well, which one is a draft? Which one is the final?
Especially nowadays when the whole process is much more fluid. There often isn't a space between the recording and the mixing because often they are blended into one DAW. So you're mixing as you're recording, at least, which is what I do. Which helps me take decisions later on because if I want to be sure that what I'm hearing from the drums is what I'm hearing, what I'll be having in the final stage of the mixing. So often I pre-mix them. But actually,
I guess I'm gonna, sorry, go ahead.
Jack White is famously known for recording onto 8-track 2-inch tape with drums being in mono. So and he obviously has a lot of success. So I guess there's something he's doing right.
I think I'm going to give a stretch to those people who are watching us. Next time you think about making music, take your favorite DAW that starts with letter A, and only with letter A, try to finish a track.
All right.
Everything else, you cannot touch. Those are the kind of limitations that you set, and you'd be quite amazed of how much productivity you can achieve. That's what I really like in the new Ableton Live, when you have your favorites. And it's almost like you have a rack of your gear. Everything else stays in the back, somewhere there by the window, and there you have only the gear that you're going to be using. You have your speakers, you have, maybe 4 different effects, one reverb type, not 10 reverb.
Oh dear, I have to rethink my process. I do have a little bit more reverb than one, but
Because you can have the black hole, you can have the spring reverb, you can have the Philharmonic Orchestra in Prague,
in
you can
Altiverb,
have the road specials and all that, and then you're thinking like, but still, it is coming from one room.
Actually, I think a lot. This is actually a very good point for the maybe to just touch upon that. The reverbs is often a mistake that people make by putting different reverbs on different tracks, and it doesn't glue because obviously the brain is telling us, hey, they're not playing in many, in one place, but in many different places. So it's actually important to at least for one reverb to glue them all, And
you know what they need after, and this is where it becomes a really big problem because it doesn't glue. Then you're going to use a glue compressor to make it glue.
Of course.
So you're going to cut all the dynamics. You're going to get rid of all the beauty in your mix because you want to make a glue. Of course you want to make a glue.
So techno is not all about loudness then, I guess.
Well, it is about loudness, but the thing is, I can tell this officially. I've never used the compression in my music. And people sometimes ask me, how do you get those kick drums sounding like chopping trees in the middle of a jungle?
Really? You've never used a compressor?
No.
Amazing.
No compressor, no limiter. Those are like the curse words in my studio.
How do you end up with a competitive? Because I'm not a big loudness guy. I like to have my mixes breathing. So I think at most -12 LUFS is the top. But some people have -8, -6 LUFS, which is crazy. So how dynamic are your mixes?
Oh, the mixes are very dynamic.
Okay.
Sometimes, whatever seems to be 135 BPMs, it sounds like it's 138 or faster, just because of the crazy dynamics. But what I do though is I use delays, and for example, to spread out the sound of a kick drum, to make the rhythm, to make the syncopating rhythm of the kick drum, and also, this could be very relevant to yourself when you are working with a band, for example. You take like 3 different microphones of a kick drum. That's the kind of principle I do. I mix in just the very sub of the kick with the very top of the kick. And that punch that you will normally receive by adding compression.
You add it from a sample.
By a sound.
Yeah, okay. Got that.
Without compressing and cutting. And the reason why I do that is because how many of us can really afford like the Telefunken? You know what I mean? Like the real compression.
LA2 or 1176 or something, yeah. Well, thanks to UAD we can, kind of.
Well, yes, but still, like I'm talking about the hardware version of it, and unless you have very top compressors and limiters that are made from like really good, let's say, classic brands, then I wouldn't use like stock things from DAW, to compress your mixes. And so because I don't use stock compression from Ableton, for example, I teach people how to make their mixes sound like they're compressed without compression.
Lovely. I need to take that course. So Pavel Serafin has mentioned, wow, so it is just pure gain staging, Peter, which also it is true. Gain staging is absolutely
what he's talking
the trick.
about. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But see, the thing is, and this is the beauty of the fader again, right? We're going into you can't really see the fader, but if I move it down, right? Okay. See, the beauty of the fader is that once you're in the focus of the mix and you say these are your kicks, then you are really at a very close to the speakers. You're able to get that perfect balance. So you know how much punch there is, how much saturation is needed. Maybe on one of the channels when we talk about gain staging, you don't need saturation on the whole thing. You maybe want to saturate the high end of it just to get that crispness of the kick drum, because the kick needs to be crisp if it's going to cut through the mix as well. So it's gain staging 100%. It's leveling 100%. And it's really, really listening, not only making a beautiful kick on its own, because a drummer that hits a kick drum, it's like a handicap. He needs to have other instruments that work with it. So always relate that kick drum to something else in your mix.
To bounce it off, yeah.
You were talking about this whole notion of rhythm section when you have the bass and the kick.
Yeah.
Those things, I've been told, and this is quite interesting. I've been told that I've studied this by say going to band concerts. Like any good bands will do concerts, for example. What can you hear at a concert of a band the most?
Whoa.
You hear the kick drum,
and the bass.
You hear the snare drum,
and the snare drum, yeah, of course.
And you hear the vocal. Everything else is secondary.
That's true.
So if you get those three things, if you get your synth lead sound pumping in the right way, if you get that kick drum working the way it needs, and something that has that stamp on it, then you're good. Then you can use everything else like it's almost like this is your focus in the picture and everything else is just blur.
Yeah, that's
But
true.
you cannot have everything in your face, can you?
No.
And this is where gain staging comes in place.
And I have a feeling that when we're talking about saturation, not everybody realizes that it does do compression. I mean, you compress the signal when you saturate.
Yes.
So when for example, in real life, I'm saturating my Neve 1073 while recording, that's what we do. We saturate a little bit. We push the gain and we turn the volume out so that we don't saturate the digital input. I mean the input of the analog input of the sound card. But we are actually in effect compressing a little bit at that.
You're flattening the sound a bit to make it work in the mix.
Yeah.
But the thing is, I have like the Vintech audio, which is kind of an emulation of.
Yeah, I know it.
As close emulation you can get to the Staten 73 you're
it's
talking
really good.
about.
Yeah.
And the way I used it is exactly what you were saying, is I would drive the line input and I will have the output very low.
Yeah.
So to get that saturation in it. And but sometimes it's just another thing is, I mean, this is the whole idea of the wall of a sound. When you have one whole mix non-saturated and one fader of the whole mix saturated, and just blend it in to add that little punch.
It's true, so, and also it's handling how you handle your transients and the instruments that do have transients. If you put them sticking out all through, then you have big dynamics. If you put them a little bit in, then you suddenly gain that dynamic range, and you in effect have been compressing it, but manually, so to speak. Yeah.
For the transient shaping, I use a lot of DAW for that.
Me too.
VSTs, because the UAD, for example, have really good transient shapers, where you are able to meticulously get into the right frequencies.
I've been actually using also Soothe and Spiff, which is a Danish brand who just do a crazy transient shaping. Frequency-dependent transient shaping. Right. So we have all the tools now, really, to make it sound good. And you don't need much, really. You don't need much. No. So, guys, sorry, because everybody said that it got interesting towards the end, but we'll keep you wanting more, and we'll come back, and maybe Peter will do some online course.
Let's keep that 80%. Let's keep that 80%.
Exactly. We'll leave the 20 for the next time.
Exactly. Perfect.
So, Peter, thank you very, very much for being with us tonight.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much. I wish you guys good luck with the project. I think it's an excellent idea. I've been already watching the previous ones as well. So keep it going. Well done, guys.
Well, thank you very much, and you guys see you soon on the next episode. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.